Hi, so we're in part 2 of Unit 1 of our ESLG 489 course. And what we're continuing to do in this unit is to understand what has the historical response been in the United States to those who have cultural and linguistic diversity. So those who speak a language other than English, those whose home culture looks different from from mainstream US culture. So we need some terms to talk about. I bet there's already some terms that you come to the table knowing. For example, you've probably heard of the concept of the melting pot. And often when we hear the term melting pot, it's in a very positive way. For example, America is a melting pot. We welcome everyone. But really, it's not an entirely positive term, and we're going to take a look at that. And so let's walk through these terms, and I'll go over them a little bit to make sure that you begin to kind of anchor your understanding in what they mean. So the first term that you need to know is assimilation. And of course, you see a word that looks like simile there, similar, and that essentially means that when a minority culture, a minority language joins the majority culture, the majority language, they assimilate. They become like the majority culture. They begin to speak the majority language. There's also an assumption there that they're giving up the first language. They're giving up the home culture to join the larger group. And so assimilation really means giving up what you come with so that you can join the bigger group. Some different ways that we've talked about it before. I talked about melting pot. So this idea that people come to the U.S. and then what their responsibility is to simply become like everyone else, to give up what makes them unique. And there's also another term, Americanization, which is essentially taking people who have a minority language, a minority culture, and making them more like us, more like North Americans, more like people from the US, the majority culture. And so this is very much, these were ideas that were held up as very important to the well-being of the United States, very important to the well-being of maintaining culture, very important to maintaining the power of English in the world. In the past, and as you saw from part 1, from the time, essentially, of World War I on, that's when we became, I think, completely obsessed with assimilation. But what we know now is we now know the value of heritage languages. We now know the value of heritage cultures. We now are starting to understand that just like there are special ecological systems around the world that don't exist anywhere else, and at times people are discovering, for example, medicines in those ecosystems that don't exist anywhere else. There are beliefs that there are ideas that can only be produced by certain cultures. There are ideas that can only be expressed by certain languages. And so every time we begin to we start to let a language go, we stop maintaining a language, we stop maintaining a culture, we now believe it's now a deficit for the United States. It's a deficit for all of our well-being in the world. And so in the past, World War I, yay, assimilation, but that's not where we are now, and we realize it's a great loss when any language, when any culture is no longer maintained. And so where we are now is at a place of cultural pluralism, this belief that minority cultures, minority languages should be maintained. Those groups should keep those languages, keep those cultures alive, and that they have value, and that the larger group does see that value and not only accepts but responds really positively to those differences. And so this is what we are reaching for now, cultural pluralism. Hard to say, not hard to understand, hard to say. A culture acculturation is a related process by which someone in a minority culture, a minority language, they begin to take on some of the values of the majority culture. So they begin to understand at a more deeper level how the larger culture thinks, how they make decisions, how they organize their time, and those in the minority culture take on some of those values so that they can be successful in the majority culture as well. So acculturation is, I think it's a win-win process in which people maintain that first language, they maintain that first culture, and at the same time they're building bridges so that they can be successful with others who don't belong to that minority culture. Let's take a look over here. Here are two terms. Enculturation really is connected with acculturation. Enculturation is referring to basically learning about a different culture and taking on some of those values, which is what I said acculturation means as well. So here's a little example. When I'm in Nicaragua, I'm usually living at a school. I'm living in teachers' quarters. I'm surrounded by other English teachers who are from Nicaragua. And when I go to my office in Managua, in the capital, I'm surrounded by others who are working around me who are from Nicaragua, and I very much want to be successful in that environment. And so every time I go, I learn a little bit more about how people respond to bad news, how they greet others in different situations, what they say when they enter a room in a formal or informal situation. And so I'm learning as I can about the culture, and when I'm there, I'm taking on some of those values. And I have to say, I think some of those values are staying with me even when I come back to the US. For example, I have a type A personality. I like to plan things, and when I plan something, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. And that's not an approach to life that's taken in Nicaragua. It's not that people don't make plans, but they don't assume that they're going to work out. And I think that in my time there and understanding how many things can go wrong to your plans, for example, electricity being out that day, a bridge going out so the bus can't go, that kind of thing. There being a parade, so all buses are canceled. I think I've taken on a little bit of that understanding that we don't get to control as much as I'd like to think we can. And so I've enculturated a little bit to Nicaraguan culture, and I think really kind of kept that with me even when I'm back. Now, deculturation, D, as you would guess, a negative meaning taking away culture. And this specifically means when we expect or ask someone to give up their first culture, their home culture, in order to better match up with the majority culture. So deculturation is very much connected to these processes of assimilation, Americanization, and the idea of the melting pot. Deculturation, an extremely negative process in which someone is giving up the original way that they saw the world, they experienced the world. Now there are two more concepts here, and in your Canvas site there is an image that I want you to take a look at that probably will give a more instantaneous and deeper understanding of the difference in the terms than my words will here. So after you listen to this, please take a look at that image. It follows this lecture immediately below in Canvas. So we often hear about equality and equity. And again, just like I started out by saying, this is where we used to be, this is where we are now. This is where we used to be, and this is where we are now. So what's the difference? Equality is the belief that to be fair, what we do is we treat everyone the same way. So you give everyone the same amount of information, you give everyone the same amount of help, you give everyone the same resources. But the problem with that is that when people come to the table, when people come to your classroom, they've got different strengths and they've got different challenges and weaknesses. But equality, the idea of equality is that you'll treat them all the same, and then what we know is you'll get very different results. In the past, the belief in equality was that if a student, for example, does not succeed, the onus is on the student. The problem was the student. It certainly wasn't the teacher, because the teacher treated everyone the same. Now, especially in the last 20 years, we've paid so much more attention to the differences in students when they come to us. And we know that equality, applying the concept of quality, will always give us different results. And so here's where we are now, equity. Equity is the belief that we need to pay attention to what a student brings to us in the classroom. We need to know them. We need to know their backgrounds. We need to understand them. We need to know what their strengths are, what the resources are that they can draw upon, and they do draw upon, but we also need to know what their challenges are. What are the weaknesses that they're challenged by? And what that means is that what we give that student is focused on that student's unique situation, their unique language learning or learning environment needs. And so what a teacher gives this student is different from this student, is different from this student, with the eye that you get the same result. So in other words, it's meeting students where they are so that you can get them all to the same objective, the same goal that you have for them. So very different ideas there. So I'd like you to take a look at that image that I posted on Canvas, just to very quickly see different people have drawn it different ways. What is that difference? And after that, I'd like you to read an essay that I really love. The first time that I read it, it was in a textbook that was assigned reading for some students I was teaching in an intensive English program. So they were all international students who were working on their English so that they could get accepted to a university. And the name of the essay is The Struggle to Be an All-American Girl. So where I want you to go with that is to read the essay. I hope that you enjoy it. Notice how language is learned. As a language teacher, notice how language is learned. And then I'd like you to think about these concepts, think about these responses to culture, and respond to the discussion prompt in talking to us about what you see in Elizabeth Wong's essay.